So today is Memorial St. Francis Xavier, and I drove to another town for an evening mass because it's just how it worked with my work schedule. And I unfortunately arrived considerably late to mass because I was not thinking that I need to give myself time to warm the car up because it's now cold here and there's snow on the ground. And I didn't expect to have to drive through rush hour traffic, which of course I did because I was leaving right in the evening when everybody else was getting off work, and I wasn't planning on getting stuck behind a train in the next town, which I did. So those three things made me considerably late to mass, and I walked in right at the end of the gospel, which was from the Gospel of Luke. And this is what I heard as I walked in. "Blessed are the eyes that see what you see. For I say to you, many prophets and kings desired to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it." And those are the words of the Lord to his disciples from the Gospel of Luke. And so until I had a chance to go home and read the whole gospel, I just meditated on that last passage on my drive home after Mass. And there was plenty there to meditate on, just with that last line. It's the kind of thing that makes you a little uncomfortable about getting to Mass late, let me tell you. I was just reflecting then on what the Lord's talking about, that he's reminding his disciples who are here with him, the people who are following him now, who see him, who hear his words, who have the great gift and the great privilege of hearing his words, of seeing him in person. So, one gift that they had that we didn't have is that they could see his facial expressions. They could hear the intonations of his voice. All the things that we communicate, what we have are the words on the page, right? Accounts that were made by eyewitnesses, and that's a massive gift. They had all of it there, all of the things that we communicate with our eyes, with our emotions, with how we speak, how we intone things, and all of the things that he said that weren't recorded, which St. John makes clear there was plenty of. And the Lord is drawing attention to the fact and reminding them and us, because of course every time the Lord spoke something that made it into the gospel, he of course knew that someday we would be sitting here reading it. He knew that I would be hearing that line when he said it, because of course he's omniscient. But it's the reminder that for millennia before the coming of Christ, there was all of this time of anticipation, the most anticipated event in human history. I'm not counting the second coming because that's actually at the end of time. So within human history, the most anticipated event was the coming of Christ. For us, being a faithful Christian is living the life of Christ, imitating Christ in our lives, being faithful to the teachings he's given us, right? Conforming our lives to Christ. But for millennia, what it meant to be a faithful servant of God was not about conforming your life to Christ because Christ hadn't come yet. It was about anticipating. It was about anticipating the coming of Christ. But think what that means. For us, in a sense, we are, whether or not we realize it or not, whether or not we feel like it all the time or not, we are already living the reward for our fidelity. Because when you live as a faithful Christian, the Holy Spirit is dwelling within you. When you're in a state of grace, when you are baptized, you're already a child of God. You're already the bride of Christ, the mystical bride of Christ, and you're already a member of Christ's body. You participate in the Messiah himself actively now. We have communion with Christ in the flesh through the Holy Eucharist. We have his words in the Gospels. We have the example of all the saints who have come, that the church has given us as examples of how to live the life of Christ. So if there's any confusion or we want deeper understanding or a new appreciation for what we're participating in, we have all of that as well. All of these brilliant men and women and holy men and women who have lived that life, who have written well of him, who have spoken well of him. We have all of that at our disposal as well, given to us by God through the church. But for longer than we've been around, right? For longer than the Christians have existed, the people of God were still living and dying, were still working and praying and suffering and putting in the effort to live in proper relation to God. Not participating in their reward, but anticipating the reward. But for us, it's different. We actually are participating in the reward now, whether we feel like it or not. But that itself is such an enormous privilege. That reminder, that the Lord is giving us here. And he specifically names the prophets and the kings. Like when you think of the stories in the Old Testament, we're talking about the great ones, the holy ones, the magnificent ones, people like Moses and Abraham, Isaiah and Elijah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and people like that, okay, that are held up, that the great ones who poured themselves out and made enormous acts of faith and took risks and suffered, made sacrifices and worked and prayed hard. And for them, it was all in anticipation, in hope of receiving something we all have and participate in now, and that is handed to us even as infants, literally as infants. And I just think how casually we approach these things. It's so easy to, because because it is so common. It's so easy to approach these things so casually. I can't remember now where I heard this. I don't know if this was a podcast or if I read it somewhere or what, but someone had I just read or heard this, that reminder that we should be on our knees thanking God every day just for the gift of the scriptures themselves, just for the scriptures alone, that we have the words of God, the words of Christ himself. We have these accounts. And we have all of the Old Testament written down for us, and the church has provided for us and said, here is the anticipation of it, here is the fulfillment. And then we have the letters of Paul that are more instruction, further instruction on how to live this out, the Acts of the Apostles, the accounts of the early Christians. We have all that handed us. That alone that we have is enough for us to be on our knees every day thanking God just for that. And that's not even getting into the sacraments. That's not even talking about the greatest gifts that God has given us. So I think it's just worth reflecting on, remembering, as the Lord is telling us to remember the people who are our ancestors in the faith, our forefathers in the faith, the great ones who are holier and more magnificent than we are, and have worked harder and suffered more and sacrificed more than we have, just in the hopes of the things that we have available to us now. That maybe through our empathy for them, remembering them, can help renew in us an appreciation for the gifts that God has given us. Yeah, that's it. That's what I wanted to reflect on.